Today I'm going to make a video about Planned Parenthood, which a lot of people seem to think is a prenatal care organization because of its name. The founding of Planned Parenthood is quite different from the history that everyone thinks. According to their website, for instance, they say in 1916, Planned Parenthood was founded on the idea that women should have the information and care they need to live strong, healthy lives and fulfill their dreams. And it continues, Planned Parenthood traces its roots back to nurse, educator, and founder Margaret Sanger, whose activism changed the world. Sanger had the revolutionary idea that women should control their own bodies and thus their own destinies. Imagine that. That would be great if it were true, but the reality is that Planned Parenthood had a very different founding. Planned Parenthood was aligned with eugenics, which is the idea that certain people are inferior to others. It was a lot of times, in American history and European history, it focused on white people being superior. That meant usually Scandinavian, blue eyes, blonde hair, that sort of thing. The Aryan race came from that idea. This was actually a science, and it was taught in Ivy League universities like Harvard and Yale, Princeton, and it had big effects on people in the United States and across the world. So the Planned Parenthood organization was founded as the American Birth Control League. That was its original name. And the term birth control had a different meaning back then. For instance, what Margaret Sanger's definition of birth control was, she said, birth control is nothing more or less than facilitating the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives, or those who will become defectives. So her idea of birth control was not women having control over their own bodies, it was more the government having control over who should be reproducing and who shouldn't. In an article that Sanger published, it was actually based on a speech that she made. It was called The Function of Sterilization. She argued that certain groups of the population should be targeted with sterilization. She praised there was an immigration reform law in 1924 that was very restrictive. It put a quota system on the number of immigrants that could come from each country. And if that quota was like a very low quota, and after that, the United States would not allow any more immigrants for that year. This was actually a factor in preventing the Jewish refugees from fleeing the Holocaust, because they wouldn't allow any more than a certain percentage of them to come into the United States. So in this essay, or this speech, Sanger praised these immigration restrictions, saying they controlled the, quote, quality of our population. And she was also arguing that they didn't go far enough, because the population of the United States already was low quality, so they needed to do something about that. So she called them undesirables, the people that she had in mind, morons, defective, and diseased. And she complained that they weren't segregated from society as much as they should be in, quote, asylums, prisons, and other institutions. And she said they should be sterilized, as well as being segregated, saying it would be the, quote, salvation of American civilization. In her autobiography, she also talked about giving a birth control and eugenics talk to the women's branch of a KKK chapter in New Jersey. And they must have liked what they heard, because after she finished her speech, she reported in her autobiography that she received a dozen invitations to speak from other white supremacist groups. So I'm kind of thinking that she appealed to them. Along with so Margaret Sanger was not the only eugenicist in the Planned Parenthood organization. There were other leaders. One of them was Lothrop Stoddard. He was a member of the board of directors. He actually was a founding member of Planned Parenthood, and he was a leader of the KKK. he was a racist, and he wrote this book called The Rising Tide of Color, where he was basically saying that the savage races, meaning Native Americans, blacks, maybe Jewish people, were going to take over and pollute the white race so that they wouldn't be able to have control anymore. He was a member of the American Eugenics Society, as were a lot of Planned Parenthood members. And he actually visited with Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, who was helping orchestrate the final solution, and he advised the Nazis on racial policy. He actually investigated a German forcible sterilization program that was just starting. They would actually catalog the race of all the German people, and those who didn't have a quality, like their race was not high quality enough for the German government, they were actually forcibly sterilized. They were brought before a court and by court order were sterilized. So Stoddard praised this German sterilization program. Among the races they were targeting were blacks. They were German soldiers that had married African women, or they had had sex with African women, and their children were the ones being targeted. And he praised that program as weeding out the worst strains in the Germanic stock in a scientific and truly humanitarian way. And then there was this other Planned Parenthood board member named Harry Laughlin. He was, again, a eugenicist who used his influence to pass compulsory sterilization laws throughout the United States. He actually wrote a model that he said would be most likely to pass the court system. And sure enough, in 1927, the Supreme Court ruled on the case Buck versus Bell. Carrie Buck was a Virginia citizen who was accused of being feeble-minded, which was a catch-all term used back then for someone they wanted sterilized. And she was accused of being immoral for becoming pregnant while unmarried, even though she had actually been raped by a relative of her foster family that she was staying with. The foster family wanted to get rid of her, so they institutionalized her and labeled her all these things. So the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Virginia was within its rights to sterilize Buck. The court opinion was written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he ended with the infamous words, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough," accusing her mom of being feeble-minded, her, and then her daughter. And ultimately, this decision led to the sterilizations of over 60,000 people, some estimate as many as 80,000, in the 30 states that started eugenics programs. Some of these programs, like Oregon's, lasted until the 1980s. Oregon's lasted until 1983. And some states were particularly bad. California alone accounted for half of all U.S. sterilizations before World War II. And these were often performed without the knowledge or consent of the victims. And some of them were as young as 10 years old. They're still alive, some of the eugenics victims in California and other states. California still has not acknowledged them or apologized. The governor did say that he regretted it, but it has not given them any reparations. North Carolina continued sterilizing people into the 1970s, and some of them were as young as 8. One of these people that were sterilized was Elaine Riddick. She spoke out at a town hall meeting in 2010 and talked about her experiences. She was sterilized at only 13 after being raped and becoming pregnant, again, like Carrie Buck. So anyway, the term birth control had a very negative connotation for people. After World War II, just when the word was filtering out about the Nazis' racial programs, in 1942, the Birth Control League, American Birth Control League, decided to change its name to Planned Parenthood. But its policies stayed the same. Its connection with the American Eugenics Society. At one point, Margaret Sanger was wanting to make the American Eugenics Society and Planned Parenthood one organization, and she also wanted to combine their newsletters. The American Birth Control newsletter was called the American Birth Control Review, and she wanted to combine that with the American Eugenics Society's newsletter. But there was actually some disagreement about between the eugenicists and Margaret Sanger, so they decided not to combine the two organizations. Anyway, so that is the early history of Planned Parenthood. Its connection with the American Eugenics Society continued until the 1970s. In the 60s, that's when eugenics started falling out of favor. People didn't want to hear about eugenics anymore after the Holocaust, so that gave it a very bad name, even worse than before. So let me know what you think about this video, and if you have any other questions, I'll try to answer them in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.